This graph shows the rise in obesity rates over the years. Like I said, obesity was pretty much non-existent before the 1950s. But fast forward to today, 72% of us are overweight. Now look at this. The blue line shows the rise in synthetic chemical production over the years, and the red one, the rates of diabetes. Notice how they match almost exactly. But what I was told next by Chen was even more shocking. He had taken all of his data that proved conclusively that it was chemical obesogens that were to blame for this massive crisis and showed it to the head of his department. The very next day, he was told to destroy the research and never speak of it again. And if any of the findings were leaked, there would be serious consequences for him and his family. So he had no choice but to bury it. He went on to explain that China is the largest producer of chemicals and plastics in the world by a very large margin. So the Chinese government were terrified of a global backlash if the effects were exposed, because it could destroy their economy. So instead of risking that, they decided to hide it. It finally all made perfect sense. The out-of-control obesity crisis really wasn't being caused by the junk food and lazy lifestyles like we are constantly being told. It was actually things like microplastics and modern-day pollution that were causing hormonal problems, making it virtually impossible for us to lose the weight and keep it off, no matter what we do, and no matter how hard we try. Exactly what was happening with Amy. Now, although these dangerous substances are wreaking havoc inside every person who struggles with weight loss, the truth is, your belly, arm, hip, and thigh fat are not a life sentence. It's actually reversible, explained Chen. You see, although my research was shut down, I was still extremely worried for my family and friends. After all, wasn't it my duty to protect them if I could? I didn't want them continually being poisoned by all these toxic substances, causing them to spiral into obesity and major health issues. But although I now knew the real root cause, what could be done? I couldn't make the whole world stop using plastics, cars, or all of those other obesogenic pollutants. In fact, even if we did, wouldn't make much difference, because the toxins are already everywhere in our environment. It could take hundreds or even thousands of years to clean up this mess, and that wouldn't help us right now. So I figured that my only option was to try to find a way to detoxify these obesogens from our body, to try to reverse the damage already done and protect against it in the future. So I spent every waking moment researching to find a solution, going through years and years of medical studies. It was a long, hard struggle, but I eventually made a breakthrough, and it came from a very unusual place. I stumbled across an article in a scientific journal. It wrote of a small village in the outskirts of Tibet. The people there seemingly had the lowest rates of diabetes and heart disease in the world, and their average life expectancy was 25% higher than anywhere else. But no one could figure out why. This was extremely interesting, because it seemed to confirm the direct link between toxic pollution and people's health, as it's likely these villagers haven't been exposed to many obesogenic compounds. I mean, everything I'd heard about Tibet makes me think of pristine snow-capped mountains and fresh, clean water and air. But when I got to the end of the article, I discovered something that threw me. Apparently, located right next to this village was a large Chinese mining operation. And I know how much pollution they produce, so that theory was out the window. I decided the best thing was to go and investigate for myself. So I made the long trek to the Tibetan village. When I arrived, I settled into a small guest house and went about befriending the locals and trying to uncover what was happening. Their air and water was indeed heavily polluted from the close mine. But the people seemed very healthy, and I noticed that very few were overweight. Many of them also looked years younger than their true ages. The more I looked around, the more apparent it was that something really strange was up. But I couldn't figure out what. Then one morning, the landlady of the guest house offered me a cup of tea. I accepted, and after she poured, I took a big swig and instantly spat it out all over her beautiful white tablecloth. "I am so sorry, but what is this? It tastes awful," I exclaimed. It was clearly not like any kind of tea that I had ever tasted. The landlady was extremely embarrassed and apologized profusely. She explained that this was their local special tea, and legend was that if you drank a cup of it every day, you would be protected and live a long and healthy life, and that it would ward off all sickness and pain. The people of the village had drank it for generations, so were used to the strong, bitter taste. "Where did you get it from?" I asked. She told me that it's a traditional blend that has been brewed in the local monastery for thousands of years. The monks sold it to the villagers and then would use any money they made to feed and house the poor. I asked if she could give me directions, and I set off. I made my way up a narrow stone staircase set into a steep hill to the monastery in the distance. When I eventually arrived at its large wooden doors, I rang an old rusty bell hanging from a piece of rope. After several minutes, they creaked open and a friendly-looking monk greeted me. I told him that I was very interested in learning about the tea. "It's our secret elixir," he whispered. "The recipe has been passed down through generations, and it has magical healing properties." I was, of course, very skeptical, but asked if I could perhaps buy some. He nodded, asked me to wait, and disappeared inside. A couple of minutes later, he returned, clutching a small wooden box. He handed it to me, and I peered inside, discovering a strange-smelling mixture of what looked like ground herbs and spices. "What's it made of?" I inquired. "Unfortunately, that's something I can't reveal," the monk replied. "It has been our traditional recipe for over 2,000 years, and it is a grave violation of the monastic code for me to share the ingredients with anyone." "No problem," I said. "I completely understand." Doesn't that sound fair? So go ahead and experience these amazing results for yourself. Don't delay. Click below to claim your package now.